we are in the condition we are in the state of ignorance we are in the state of war, in the state of economic depression, in the state of depletion of the resources of our planet because of the greed of psychopaths who thought they could create their own reality. Well, look at the reality they created.
You're listening to Shop Talk Radio, the world for people who think.
Hello and welcome to Shop Talk Radio. I'm your host, Neil Bradley, together with Joe Quinn and Jason Martin, Juliana, and Laura. We're going to be talking tonight about a topic that we've covered a lot of times before and that really cannot get enough coverage. So we're going to have on, he's not with us just yet, but the author of a book that we came across recently called The Empathy Trap, Breaking Free from Psychopaths. No, excuse me, that's the title, sorry. It's The Empathy Trap, Understanding Antisocial Personalities. It's co-authored by Dr. Jane McGregor and Tim McGregor, and we're going to have Tim on with us today to discuss his research. Tim McGregor is a freelance consultant, writer, and trainer. He's also been a mental health practitioner in the UK, and Dr. Jane McGregor, co-author, is a lecturer at the University of Nottingham in the UK. And before we get into their book, I think I should start by saying that it's a really good summary of a lot of things that
I thought there was a wide coverage of like the core concepts. I mean, you have to read, like, say, for instance, 4 or 5 books, and they'll say all the different things. So it kind of brought a lot of stuff together from what I looked at.
Yeah, exactly. Now, our listeners are going to be more familiar with, we've used the term psychopaths to describe the condition that people have.
Right.
Now, the authors of this book have preferred to use the term sociopath.
Well, a rose by any other name would smell just as sweet type of thing. So, I mean, in a certain sense, we're obviously trying to talk about some sort of phenomena, that's some sort of phenomenon in this case, sorry, forgive my Greek, that's going on here in the world, that we're noticing that there are certain types of people, and we're having a lot of trouble finding a name for them. And I don't think that the psychological sciences are being very, very rigorous about the terminology, and that's been something that's been complained about very often, that, people just sort of coin terms willy-nilly, and even, the term psychopath, I find it kind of like a little bit of an obscene term to talk about those type of people by saying that they suffer from mind pain. That's a little bit weird.
Yeah, it's kind of what it would directly translate to, but the authors, Tim and Jane McGregor, do point out at the beginning of their book that they're not, they acknowledge that there is this confusion over definition.
Right.
And rather than try to, get really deep into that, they do describe the essence of what the same illness is.
Right.
Psychopath, sociopath.
Yeah, in the end, that's the most important thing. I think that a lot of people get caught up on minutia and details, and they sort of refuse to have discussions with you. They prefer to argue semantics or some definition thing when you're talking about some sort of real phenomenon that exists, and then therefore, if you don't use the right term, then they'll spend hours and hours with you.
I think they're using the term psychopath, or sociopath rather, because they're not talking exclusively about psychopaths.
Right.
They're including several other types of disorders under this umbrella, all of which basically have the same, or share many of the same traits, but ultimately the encounter with any one of these personality disorders has pretty much the same effect, follows pretty much the same course. They behave pretty much the same way because they share certain traits, the main one being lack of empathy.
Exactly, and hence the title of their book. Their point being that empathy is what is lacking, and what they lack, as they explain in the book, is what can help the rest of us.
Right.
Well,
to
they
deal
also
with the
talk
problem.
about, the empathy trap as being the fact that a person is empathic, has empathy, makes them a target,
Makes them vulnerable.
Basically makes them vulnerable. They fall into the trap of their own nature because they do have feelings. They they do feel empathy, and this makes them susceptible.
Well, which is probably why the effects and the methodology of them is so similar. It's not because there's something similar about them. It's because they're similar about empathic people. Their weaknesses are rather consistent across the board. The ways to manipulate them seem to be consistent and seem to be something that certain types of people study and attempt to exploit.
Yeah, I think at this point now there's how do you say, there are tracks now that are well worn by people who are onto this problem,
right?
And those who do grok the essence of the problem,
right,
home in on the same essential points,
right?
And it's good for them that they will not be drawn into an argument about how exactly to identify them,
right,
or how exactly to define the problem, because first they put their hands up and say, we acknowledge that this is a very, very difficult problem. It's a new problem for most people.
Right.
Well, in any event, let me talk about this book. Hand it over here. I think it was probably a couple of months ago. We got an email from Jane McGregor, and she told us about her book and asked us if we'd be interested in talking to her about it. And we told her, well, sure, but we'd like to read the book first. So in due course, the book arrived. It's not a very big book. It's a small book. And I sat down and read it pretty much in an afternoon. And, of course, most of you listeners who know me know that I've read probably every book on psychopathy that in existence, and I've read endless case studies and other personality disorders, narcissism, any kind of cluster B as they refer to them in the U.S., but I'm sure that they have a different nomenclature in the U.K. But in any event, as Jason just mentioned a little while ago, it really covers a pretty broad spectrum of concepts extracted from numerous books. And despite its smallness, they don't get bogged down in trying to describe every characteristic or give you case studies of psychopaths or different personality disorders, or arguing over the designation of the disorder or how to diagnose, that sort of thing. They give you a profile, of course, which hits the high marks, and then they move on to, hold on here, let me put my glasses on so I can see what I'm talking about. I've got the book right here in my hand, and in their profile of the psychopath, they've got, first of all, superficial charm. The sociopath, and remember, they're talking about numerous types of pathological disorders that they're covering under an umbrella here, usually has a lot to say. A conversation with a sociopath can feel like being bombarded. The main thing about the sociopath is that all of their pronouncements are very authoritative. They know absolutely anything about everything, and they know the absolute bottom line truth, and nobody else can gainsay anything they say.
Or if they try, they do that faux kind of, oh, I could be wrong, tell me if I'm wrong, but, and then, of course, you can't, in a certain sense.
Because they don't allow you.
Kind of very facetious.
Because the minute you suggest that they might be wrong, then you get the next layer of bombardment. They use words and phrases intended to make them sound knowledgeable, right, but which, if you dissect their terminology or their sentences, they prove nothing more than gobbledygook. This peculiarity in their mode of expression can be exacerbated by their use of muddled-up phrases and mixed metaphors. And this is one of the characteristics of these types of personality disorders, and there are a lot of theories about it. The McGregors don't go into those theories because this is not a big examination of personality disorders. It's about the empathy trap. Sociopaths also come across as very charming the first time you meet them. And in the beginning of any kind of dynamic or relationship, they go out of their way to please you. They use flattery, and they do a lot to draw you in. They're called social chameleons. This is why a lot of people get taken in by them, because it's hard for them to believe that somebody who is so friendly, so charming, so talkative, so basically all of these things that make them an interesting partner in social conversation, that they really are dangerous. He says targets often later remark that they were overwhelmed by the sociopath's charm offensive. He may seem larger than life, a go-getter, a hero, an adventurer. They're grandiose. They have smooth conversation. And when you're in their presence, you feel that you're in the presence of someone who is very special, a superhero type of person. Mm-hmm. They usually make ordinary people feel boring and insipid, and these people want to attach themselves to this hero because it makes them feel like, you know, there's something in their life that's more exciting. So they go on to say describe some of the other traits of the sociopath, the need for the stimulation. They need constant stimulation. They become bored easily. Their heads are not full of the kinds of emotions that distract the rest of us. They have a very limited emotional range and are noted for their shallowness and fleeting attachments. They have a parasitic lifestyle. To someone targeted by a sociopath with strong parasitic tendencies, it can feel quite literally as if life is being sucked out of you. They behave with passive aggression, victimization, blaming others, self-pity, withholding information, withholding things or idea, or, just basically withholding. Learned helplessness. And then manipulator. They are manipulators. And this manipulation means that they can control victims through positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. They can use praise, superficial charm, sympathy. They can cry with you, make excessive apologies, give you money, approval, gifts, attention, that sort of thing. And that's the positive reinforcement that they use to control people. Negative reinforcement is something like, for example, you won't have to pay all those bills if you allow me to move in with you. Yet other means are intermittent or partial reinforcement used to create a climate of fear and doubt. And, of course, they use punishment, nagging, intimidation, threats, swearing, emotional blackmail, crying, playing the victim, etc. A sociopathic manipulator can cause you to believe you're going crazy. If you find yourself in a relationship where you think you need to keep a record of what's been said, because things keep changing and one thing gets said today and then, no, I didn't say that, and then something else gets said tomorrow, or he lies so smoothly and argues so persuasively that begin to doubt your own senses. Over a period of time, this is so eroding it can distort your sense of reality. The sociopath can make you feel guilty for speaking up or for not speaking up, for being emotional or for not being emotional enough, for caring or for not caring enough. The manipulation of the sociopath is a powerful strategy because most of us are conditioned to check ourselves, and we usually are our own worst critics. If accused of being in the wrong or acting imperfectly, we do whatever is necessary to reduce our feelings of guilt.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you met someone and even just a small sample of those things jumped out at you, right away you'd be on your guard, right? I mean, you would instinctively recoil and, stop, wait a minute, let me think a second. But something they developed later on in the book that I think is their concept they've introduced. They call the concept SEAT. That's an acronym, SEAT. Sociopath, empath, empath triad. It's kind of a dynamic they describe.
It's really interesting. It's
Yeah.
one of the better parts of the book, I think.
Exactly. So after summarizing what Laura's just done, the characteristics, they kind of give a sample of how all of this would fall into play.
We have a caller on the line. We're going to take it. Hi, caller. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Susan from California.
Susan, can you hold the line for just 1 second?
Yes.
Thanks. We finally have Tim on the line here, so I'm going to go and get him on the.
Okay.
Hi, is that Tim?
Hi, hello. Yes, it's me.
Hi, Tim.
Welcome.
Welcome to the show. Sorry for the problems we were having there. We've just been kind of going through your book and reading a few excerpts and discussing
We've been
it.
stalling for time. Let's just be honest.
Yeah. But anyway, we finally.
Good to have you here.
I'm glad I got through. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, Tim. Well, thanks for agreeing to come on today. We've really enjoyed the book that you've co-authored with Dr. Jane McGregor. I've already introduced the book a bit, and Laura's read some from it to our listeners. A lot of our listeners will be they'll be pretty familiar with the topic because we've just talked about it and discussed it on our website over the years and here on Soft Talk Radio. And we really like it. It's a neat little book. So I thought maybe I can begin by asking you, how is it that you began to research this topic? Was it a personal experience? Was it your professional background?
Yeah, it was a bit of both. Both myself and Jane, my wife, we've come across this and these types of people through kind of personal and families. And one of the reasons we started doing it was to actually try and help our son, who had been exposed to someone who had shown this type of behaviour. So we just started. I mean, because the main thing for us was really to try and help people dealing with these types of individuals. We're not really dealing with the sort of sociopaths themselves. It's really trying to help those affected by them. And there's not many books like this out there. Often it talks about the sociopath, the psychopath, and not looking at the impact they have and what help can be offered. So we're really keen that we can try and help people out there.
Okay, that's excellent because, as you pointed out, I mean, a lot of material is, well, let's say it's geared towards the academic, the definitions, the core of the problem itself, which is who are these people and where do they come from and what makes them tick.
Yeah, can we take this caller really quick and see what she would like to ask?
Yeah.
And because I want to come back to a discussion of this SEAT triad, because I find this to be one of the...
Okay, so Tim, we had a caller on the line just before you came on, so we're going to go back to her and then we'll come back, okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Hi, sorry, was it Susan? Susan from
Yes,
California.
hello.
Hi.
I know too well what you are talking about. I was married to bipolar sociopath abuser who did gaslighting and everything you came from. From it, my children came out of it in different ways. And then I could share with you that because I would like to know from the author what happens to the children of this. And the next person I met, because I wanted help for my son, also, someone said I'm empathic. I don't know if I am or not. But the thing is, I met a psychic energy vampire. And from it, I was with that person 1.5 years. And if you can understand it, that I was hypnotized by it's very fast, by being with him in a moment and then hypnotized on the telephone. And I didn't know, but he brought out the gifts I didn't know I had. So these people are empathic. I thought he had everything to help somebody, but he knew everything what he could use to manipulate me. A Reiki master, an empath. I now think he was a sociopath, and he finds people that he uses for his purpose, and I thought he was an indigo child. So they deprogram you.
So what's your question?
Oh, my question is that when a child's gone through this form or me, how do you overcome it? My son's, what I'm reaching out for is he developed where he can't, his emotions he's having a hard time dealing with, and so from it you can become ADD, or you can become eating disorders, or you just don't understand it.
Let's ask
so
him
if you could share that, or if you want to ask
Tim,
me
you want
anything.
to answer that question?
Yeah, there's two parts to that. The first one is we've tried to deal with those. I'm so pleased that you feel that you're sort of empathetic, and I'm pleased that you've managed to get out of that relationship. Because obviously the book looks at how you managed to get out. With children, we deal with sort of various phases. The first phase, if you're in a relationship with and your child, you're concerned, we cover things like the welfare of the child. You need to make sure that the child's safe. We look at the kind of how cruelty can be put onto a child. We also look at the kind of the relatives. So we look at all of those as well. And the thing we then look at is how you can help children move forward. Mm-hmm. There's lots of things with children in terms of increasing their physical contact. There's some ideas about improved eye contact. There's lots of ideas. You're probably reading the book about ideas about mirror neurons, and it's trying to use empathy and trying to actually sort of develop that and build that and actually get that onto your child. So if they've maybe not experienced empathy, you want to actually, it's like contagious empathy. You want to actually try and do that. So it's we've got lots of things in the book about dealing with stigma and about sort of being bold and taking risks, but also follow your instinct. A lot of time, if you feel that what you're doing is the right thing. Going back to the point you made about you were exposed to some individuals, that's partly because I was trying to make people aware of if they do come across a sociopath or psychopath, and it sounds like you have come across one who's been playing games. And what we're trying to do in the book is actually recognise when that's happening. And I can talk in a minute about this seat in terms of the relationship, because that's something that we think is quite new to actually try. But I think with children, there are ways forward. We try and sort of look through, and there are lots of kind of support groups out there. Like, for example, Jane, my wife, uses some of the Facebooks. There's one in particular, it was Children of Narcissistic Sociopath, sort of parent support group that's been very helpful. So I would hope from this session there is hope out there. But as I said, if you've got with children, the immediate thing is if you're concerned, check their welfare, check if they're being exposed. There's lots of...
Well, we know he has. He's 23 now, and the therapists don't understand us at all. They don't know how to understand it, and he became addicted to other things because of this behavior he was subjected to as a kid.
Yeah, because we've got that in the book as well. Often people can deal with substance misuse or eating disorders, and again, we look into that. The book's not going to cover all of those specifics about substance misuse, but we try and then point people to where they can get help with those types of issues.
Yeah, there's a chapter on that, dealing with complex family situations in the book, and there's also an appendix of useful addresses where you can make contact and start your research for getting help. It's really kind of part of the book. So we would really recommend that you get this book. It's not a big book. It's not an expensive book. It's really easy to read, and it really drives home some important points. So.
I think it would be a good starting point, Susan.
A very good starting point.
Well, I'm learning now to keep away from that behavior, but what good thing I want to share with one thing that came out of it with me after being a year and a half with this person is that finally when I heard the voice of my ex-husband in this individual, because they're very good at deceiving you, but what came out of it after I got out of the addiction, because I was enchained by this person for that many years, not physically, but enchained by your mind, that I see the truth in people. So it's just hard to explain to a therapist different things. They just won't get it. It's just that's what you live with afterwards. That you get it, I understand it. Even if I read your book, I would say yes, 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 yes.
Yeah.
But how do you explain it to other people so that they understand your kid? Because your kid, it's hard for them to understand it. And even if they do understand what their dad did and accept it, it's how to get over these emotions inside you and understand that you couldn't do anything about it, and and you just come out of it a certain way.
He is 23. I mean, maybe you should get him to read the book too. I mean,
reading a book is not something that is what comes out of it. It's emotional, and when he gets this emotional emptiness, if you understand that, a hole inside you, and you feel it up with different ways, food, and then binging, and and then marijuana, and it could be shopping, it could be anything, it could be sex and OCD. All of this comes from what people don't realize, that when you're surviving something, you act one way. When you're free. All these things come up.
What we try to do as well is we do take similar things from other sort of psychological like addictions. We try to bring some of those evidence-based things. So we look at preventing relapse in terms of your judgment, looking at high risk, looking at identifying your mood, new ways to deal with these things, looking at habits and routines, looking at triggers, becoming lots of those things that we touch on. And again, if people need more, but I mean, it could be the therapist as well needs to understand this as well, and that's part of it, is trying to make people understand that we need to build, and not just individuals but society. We need to try and build and make people more empathetic to actually try and help. The carers need to be understanding this as well.
So did your son get over it? Is it? So I want to know there's help there. I mean, he was subjected to it. Is that what happened? I mean, I don't mean to get too personal with you, but
no. I mean, that's why we've tried not to sort of get into too much personal details. But no, I mean, from the experience we've had, what we've had to do, and we'll probably touch later in these interviews, sometimes is actually to reduce the contact with these individuals and to put very clear boundaries. And then once you've done that, is then trying to actually sort of manage yourself internally and help your family. So we've sort of really tried, if you can, it's kindness and caring and empathy. That's what we want to build, and that can then bring about. So if someone has been exposed to these individuals, empathy can help bring them through and bring them to a more positive outcome. So I mean, if this book can help in any way to move people forward, that's why we've done it. It's really just to see if we can help, and I really hope that I can help your son as well. I mean, we've got people who have been on one of these Facebook groups that we've shared some of these chapters, because we use a lot of specifics of cases.
I wouldn't mind that if you put if you put your information, because I've met other people that have this. And the thing is, when after you've gone through abuse, physical and mental, and any of this behavior, when you bond with other people, you vibrate it, and so those people can, and you don't realize it. So people come out of it wanting to help others, like myself, and there's others who know how to be more manipulative than they come out of it a different way. You understand that the victim may become, or a person that gone through it can become a manipulator, but a spiritual and losing trust. Because when a child feels, a parent who acted that way towards a child, they have a very hard time to trust somebody. Or a woman who's gone through it meets a spiritual person that you trust them, and then you lose your trust.
Susan, so this book's really to try and identify those people, and then how can you support them, how can you avoid them, how can you remove them from your life, and then how do you move forward with your life, and that's what we're trying to do.
Well, for me, I don't let people touch my hand anymore. That's what happened. He touched my hand, and he caught my energy, and that's pretty much But it's not just touch. You can get into a person's mind, body, voice, anything. Okay, I'll get off. I'll let you. There's other people probably want to talk. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your call, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take care.
Right.
Thank you.
Tim, we actually have another call here. I'm just going to go ahead and take it because they've been waiting for 11 minutes. They seem to have persistence, so I'm going to reward that. Sorry. Hi, caller. What's your name and where are you calling from?
I'm
hello?
not sure if you're... Hello? Are you talking to me?
I am indeed, yes.
Okay, it's Patricia. To the previous caller, I'd like to say that, trying to tell someone that you were a victim of a narcissist or a psychopath, whatever, most people aren't going to understand it. I think she'll get most support talking to people that have been through that.
Yeah.
The reason I'm calling is, I was in a relationship with someone who was a narcissist, and it was pretty traumatic. Thing is, I learned a lot from it, but from looking into it and all, I realized that on a global scale that we have what they call those corporate psychopaths that are actually running the economy. The Wall Street people and that kind of thing. So it's a much bigger thing. These people,
absolutely,
get into these corporations and they rise to the top of the thing because they have no fear. They'll do a $1 billion short sale or whatever they do, and to make a lot of money. So they're running our economy. So I think it's vital that people understand what these people are capable of. I mean, they can ruin a relationship. They can damage your trust. I'm getting over that, but
they can also damage a country. And
yes,
they're
this is what's happening on a global scale. This is what's wrong with the economies and the EU and all that kind of stuff over there. So it's a much bigger thing than just on an individual thing. But for people who've been through it, I think they'll get the most from other people who've been through it. Because I tell some of my friends what I went through, and they wonder why I stayed so long. And that's not going to help me,
No, yeah.
And so I've tried to educate them somewhat, but you're just going to get kicked by your friends if you tell them some of the stuff you went through.
Yeah,
because,
and
they care about you. Pardon me?
I think that highlights one of the things, though. One of the things we're trying to do is to try and understand when people do put their head above the parapet and say, this isn't right. And that's one of the key parts of the book, is we do need to encourage people to say, hang on a minute, this isn't right, we need to be doing something about it. Now, obviously with corporate, that's more difficult, but we're still trying to identify where we think there's a sociopath and how we can actually spot them and actually what can we do. Now, some individuals, what we're trying to do here is trying to understand how can you work with them. Now, obviously, we need to make society much more sort of empathetic, if we can put it that way, and actually more considerate and caring, so we actually have a more equal society. But even when you were talking there about talking to your friends, sometimes that can be described. So the friends, we talk about this thing of the seat about sociopath, empath, and apath, and often sometimes people are apathetic, sometimes blinded. They don't want to see what people are doing. They maybe don't want or are worried about actually putting their head above the parapet. And that we find there's a big proportion of the population are like that. So sometimes people don't want to do anything because they just want to keep the things the same. And that's where a lot of time this interaction happens. But I can talk about that in a bit more detail in a minute.
Yeah, we're gonna.
Is that okay, Patricia? We're gonna get into some stuff here. We really haven't had a chance to really get into some details yet. But thanks for your call.
Really interesting.
Okay,
and let me.
All right, bye.
Let me give a little introduction, Tim, here on this topic, because I want to get you right into it as quickly as possible. Earlier in the book, they write about the story of the Emperor's New Clothes, and
Absolutely.
as all of you probably know the story, which is that there were a couple of con artists who came to a kingdom at some point in time, and they claimed that they could make these wonderful, fabulous clothes, and they spent all this time doing it and producing, basically nothing. They pretended to be sewing the air and cutting garments, cutting fabric and so forth. So they made the Emperor's New, and the whole thing was based around the fact that the Emperor and these self-assured con artists, first of all, they completely duped him, and since he was in a position of authority and they were authoritative in their speech, it was basically, if you can't see the Emperor's clothes, then there's something wrong with you. And the only person in the kingdom who actually had the courage to say, "But the Emperor is naked," was a child who just saw it and it was obvious. So this story that they've got, or this idea, is about the sociopath, apath, empath triad, and all of those people who would be going along with the con artists, the sociopaths, and the Emperor, who is kind of the authority figure, would be the apaths, people who go along with, who don't care enough.
It might even be, if I don't mind interrupting, it might even be more the kind of the rest of the population, because obviously what and that it was a Hans Christian Andersen sort of fable, was that if you can't see the clothes, then you either must be stupid or you're unfit for your position. So everyone was worried about, well, I can't see anything, so am I unfit for this or am I stupid? So what you're right, actually, what the little boy was, we think, would describe as the empath. He was the one who actually had the kind of courage to stand up and say, everyone thought, oh, the emperor looks wonderful, and he said, no, he's got no clothes on. Now, what we're looking at is the idea with the kind of seat is the kind of the sociopath is. If we describe it just briefly, the sociopath, we describe it as someone, a very loose term for someone with no conscience or very little empathy. I mean, zero empathy, to be honest. And sometimes we talk about they are humankind's minus the kind bit. And, there are well-known ones. We then talk about the empath, who's someone who's got a high level of empathy, who sort of sees the situation for what it is and challenges it. But they often can be at risk of being targeted by the sociopath because they see them as someone's challenging them. Because sociopaths, some of your callers might say, they might lie, they might sort of make up things because of no empathy. They don't have a conscience. They can, manipulate and have superficial charm. And then the other bit of this triad is the apaths. And what we describe as apaths is people who are apathetic, that they're either blindsided or they're anxious or maybe fearful or they lack of interest and about concern for the person who's targeted. So you might have, and the sociopath, we say there's maybe between 1 in 100 and maybe, 4 in 100, I've got this. Then you've got the other of the spectrum, the empath, who's got lots of empathy, and then you've got the majority of the population in between, who are the apaths. And the apaths are the kind of the people in the crowd of that, the sort of emperor's new clothes, who, don't want to, they don't want to be as stupid, so they say, oh yes, your clothes looks wonderful. And the little boy is the empath who says, no, he's not clothes on. And you have to have this kind of triad here, and this is quite new, and we're trying to actually say, how can we make, and the challenge for this book and for science is, how can we make the apath, the majority of the population, actually be more aware of the issues and looking at that interaction between the sociopath, because often the sociopath will try and bring together the apaths and sort of try and get them as their sort of foot soldiers. And often when the empath does challenge, the sociopath is already trying to get some of the apaths, who might be fearful. They might be fearful about their job if they maybe want to challenge their boss. And we need to actually try and get them to say, and it's fascinating. Again, in literature, we all love to see the sort of the person actually challenging things to actually say that's wrong. But in society, quite often, a lot of society doesn't challenge that. We might describe ourselves as the apaths who are not wanting to do anything out of fear or anxiety, or that the sociopaths bullied other people into believing them, if that makes sense.
Well, so I would say that the description that he kind of gives reminds me of Bob Altemeyer's work on authoritarian followers. And he did an extensive series of research.
Are you familiar with
experiments on what he called right-wing authoritarians, or people who just sort of go along. And he did just great books. He's got a couple of them: Enemies of Freedom and
The Authoritarians.
The Authoritarians.
Are you familiar with that, Tim?
Not that one, but there's similar things like the Milgram experiment, where they actually, when they looked at people giving people electric shocks, and often people, when they're actually being told by someone in authority to do something, even though we cover the things, the ethics in the book, but often when people actually, someone in authority says you have to do this, it's fascinating the amount of people, and they could be the apaths who actually get told you have to do this. So they actually go ahead and give people those electric shocks in that experiment because they're told that they have to do that from the...
Yeah, who did that experiment?
Milgram.
That was Milgram, yeah.
And there's was it the Stanford prison experiment? There was a couple of them, but Altemeier kind of took the work out of their hands.
He took that work and took it to the next level, talking about exactly what you're talking about, which is these apaths. And I just find this to be fascinating because you've got here in your book, it says, the apath is the type of person most likely to do the sociopath's bidding. Being apathetic in this situation means showing a lack of concern or being indifferent to the targeted person.
Yep.
APATHs are an integral part of the sociopath's arsenal. I think that's extremely important, and contribute to the sociopathic abuse. And sociopaths have an uncanny knack of knowing who will assist them in bringing down the person they are targeting. And this triad that you've described. Did you guys just come up with this yourselves?
Yeah, it was just actually I'm sat at our dining table at the moment, and we were having dinner one night, and we were trying to think about this. And the key thing was thinking about, because as I said at the beginning, the book is really to help those exposed. So we're trying to think what we knew. People who were very empathetic. We had come across people who were sociopaths. We're thinking, well, what do the rest of the people do? So we came across, and we just think this is quite a good way of understanding. And what we can do is then how, not just individually, how can we help the APATHs, but we need to help them actually. And all of us will have these understandings. We'll all be in groups of friends or family who we can see perhaps similar roles. And how can we help the APATHs and the empaths sort of fend off and manage the sociopaths? And a lot of time through the book, is actually empathy can help to build. It's contagious. We can actually, the more empathetic, and it can help with the sort of APATHs. But we need to help. And we've based a lot of this, the idea of the sort of spectrum of empathy, and people can move. APATHs, no one's fixed on that. Now, some people think the sociopaths have no empathy at all. There's a bit of studies looking recently, but they might be able to switch on, but that could just be acting. But the majority of APATHs can shift where they are. They can move along the spectrum. They can become more empathetic, and that's part of this. Is one of the things towards the end. We were talking about children. Is actually trying to teach children in schools how do you become more empathetic. Because we don't teach children how. So hopefully that will then deal with some of the. I mean, obviously this is sort of idealised, but if we can try and get more people actually in the kind of APATHs, and we've described the sort of APATHs are about probably 60% of the population, and then you've got the sort of the extremes at the other end.
Do you think that the APATHs can actually be taught empathy in the way that you're describing, or do you think that they would simply, in the same way that they follow the herd now with a kind of psychopathic elite, do you think they would simply follow a benevolent leader and do what society does, or would they actually learn it from the point of view of being able to actually, create or manifest actual empathy within them?
Well, a lot of the sort of scientists now are looking that people can move and change, and we're trying to we've been thinking of this in terms of society. Is it becoming sort of more empathetic? People are becoming less tolerant of violence. There's a lot more challenging, and there's a lot more kind of social justice. So people actually are becoming a bit more empathetic, and are thinking more about other people rather than in the past. I mean, even thinking of things like, which is terrible, the kind of child sex abuse. Maybe 20, 30 years ago, people wouldn't challenge it, whereas people in the UK, and I'm sure other countries, are much more challenging now, and actually that might be people are putting themselves into those situations and say, this isn't right, I need to do something about it. But when I was growing up, I mean, I'm in my 40s, often, there was stories, people might not actually talk about those things. So you might, I suppose that's one of the advantages of your programs, is society becoming more empathetic? I think it might be, and we are, as I said, because we're sort of more tolerant, and we actually are thinking more in terms of kind of gay marriage. There's lots more of people being much more thinking about the kind of equality and about all those types of things. There's lots of things going on here, but we go back to your original point. I think we can help. If we have to talk more, and that's one of the reasons that if anything comes out of this book, if we can get people to talk more about empathy and what it means, and saying can we build on it a bit more, then that would be great. If we can get people to have that dialogue. Because at the moment people don't really talk about that very much, and as I said, people don't even talk about it at schools and stuff. So I think if we can get more people to talk about it, then hopefully that can all be a good thing.
Okay, we have another call here, Tim, so I'm just going to go ahead and take it.
Yeah.
Hi, caller, what's your name and where are you calling from? Hello? Caller? I know you're there.
No, I think they're gone.
No, they're still there, but they're not answering.
Oh, dear.
They put the phone down and walked away.
They put the phone down.
I hope I've not put them off.
No.
I think they got tired of waiting. They were holding for about 8 minutes. Do we have a caller? No? No, we don't.
No.
Okay.
Okay.
So in the meantime, Tim, related to the problem of APATs, would you say there's some kind of, there's a division between people who are born APATs, for example, they never cared really about others when they were children without being psychopathic themselves, and those who were made apathetic by the fact that they have suffered a lot of trauma, or they're really, really paralyzed by fear, etc. Because sometimes it's, I don't know what you think, but it's kind of hard to, when you look around and see people who don't seem to care, no matter what you say, no matter how much suffering they see around in the world, and there are, on the other hand, those who start caring, whether they learn about psychopaths from direct experience or they realize what's going on in the world from learning about it from a larger scale point of view. What do you think about it? Can people be born apathetic and others change?
No, I think the thing that I would bring back to that is this idea of, rather than sort of dealing with the kind of the terms, is the empathy spectrum, and there's lots of ideas around at the moment about how people sort of learn and how they actually sort of understand, and what we're trying to do is get people to understand. If you're concerned, in the book we do look at that. If you're concerned, if you've got a child who might be showing some of those, now there's lots of kind of diagnostic, but what we're trying to say is, what could you do? And we give some advice in the book about because I suppose what you need to do is a parent needs to identify that within their child to then do something about it. Now there's some ideas about having more positive contact, having better eye contact. Because there's lots of various thoughts in the moment about this idea of mirror neurons and about people learning behaviours. And I suppose with children, do they learn how to react to another by learning from their parent? Now, if their parent doesn't show any emotion and has no empathy for others, does that mean the child would then learn that way of responding? So then the way of changing that is for the child to learn more about empathy and actually to be shown empathy and to actually have more kind of... some of the kind of research is around better eye contact, better contact. So we try to find ways of how do you move children forward. So we're trying to describe what the thing is at the moment in terms of having the sociopath, empath, and apath. But how do you actually shift that? So we have more empaths and less.
Yeah. So would it be true to say that instead of taking a kind of top-down approach, which a lot of people take in terms of combating what's called the psychopathic elite and the evil of government, the corrupt government, etc., instead of attacking it at that level, you're talking about trying to change it from the bottom up by appealing to parents to be more to teach their children to spot these cases.
Yeah. But also society as a whole does need to understand there are those people out there, that we've said from the very outset, there are sociopaths with no conscious ability. We need to be able to spot them, and how do we actually then manage them in our own lives? Because the thing to remember is often, because they've no conscious, no empathy, they're not going to change. How do we individually change? How do we respond to them? And how does society respond to them? Because if we're saying there is no conscious, no empathy, they'll just keep doing what they're doing. But we as society, how do we respond to those?
Well, going back to the story of the Emperor's New Clothes, one of the problems I think we are facing is the fact that society itself, our social construction, our social standards, the way governments are set up and bureaucracies and so forth, they're all psychopathic or sociopathic to a great extent. So that corresponds to the emperor himself being taken in by the psychopathic con job.
I wanted to say something earlier on that because Jim there was saying that society has become more empathic, and one of the reasons he listed was that people have less of a tolerance for violence. And I was going to say that, well, in a certain sense, I don't know if that means that they're more empathic. I see that people are more what's the word for it? Gun shy in a certain sense. They can't handle violence at all, and they just don't want it to happen. But they don't want it to happen in their town. It's more like
they don't care if it happens somewhere else.
Yeah,
it's not here.
It's not really about being empathetic. It's about not having their lives interrupted or disturbed with something. They don't want to be stopped from what they're doing.
Yeah, that describes in a sense the apath. So that fear, is they might not want to challenge because they're fearful. They don't want to change because it's like if you have got a difficult boss. We give quite a few examples where you've got in the school environment, work environment, you've got a difficult boss. Do you want to challenge them? Are you worried about losing your job? And it's the same thing with society because obviously society might have the government as well might have a kind of do we challenge that and I think that's part of this book is that dialogue and for people to think about challenging what we're doing and to try to can we have it differently, can we have things a different way.
Well, I did also want to point out when we were talking about whether or not apaths can be taught to be empathic that Altemeyer did do a study in that vein, actually. He put these people that he called the authoritarians, he measured them before and after they had participated in kind of like a more liberal college environment and sensitivity environment, and tested them after, and he saw that there were positive results. And then he actually repeated the experiment where he followed up much later, and he found that actually once they had left the environment and been back into the authoritarian area, that they had basically reverted exactly back to their
so they respond to the environment more than anything else.
Yeah, like what Tim is saying
pressure.
is this like, better eye contact with people, better emotive contact, looking at people's faces, detecting emotions, seeing people express positive emotions. It does kind of rub off on them, but of course, once they re-enter a negative environment, then those negative kind of sociopathic narcissistic things that make them apathic again, that they just they can't deal with it, they fall back into it. So obviously continual exposure is probably the most important thing. At least that's what I kind of gathered.
Well, it's like I think the chief thing about them is that they want an authority who is going to be responsible for them and who sets the example for them. Right. And whatever authority is present is the one that they're going to follow. And if they don't have a good example, if they don't have a benevolent authority, then they're going to follow a negative one.
I think that they fall into two groups as well, You go ahead, Tim.
And one of the things, is to try and to build up, there's lots of practical steps as well to try, because I take some of the points you're saying in terms of actually the environment, but we still do need to actually, recovery is possible. That's one of the things we try and actually look at. It's one of the recoveries used in lots of other areas of sort of health and social care. And we're trying to say, we're trying to pull in examples from elsewhere where we can see it actually work. So we're looking at, ideally in the world, we'd want to have more empaths. We'd want to build up those. So we try and find ways. So it's how do you deal with day-to-day stuff? Looking at, as I was talking to one of the callers earlier, looking at preventing relapses, looking at all these high-risk situations, all of those things, and then dealing with the fallout, and if we can try and, it's a step process, it's going to take a long period of time, and there's lots of people looking at this, but what we're trying to do is looking at how can the individuals, now, we can help look at the scientists, looking at what they're doing, but we also need to look at how can we help the individual day-to-day who are exposed to the sociopath, and how can they, because one of the other things we were concerned about is often people have, with particularly lots of mental health problems, who have probably been exposed to sociopaths in the past, and there's a huge impact on the health community and the health provision. So we want to actually try and help people so they're not ended up becoming unwell, both sort of mentally or physically.
Well, that's the beauty of this little book, because it's like Sociopathy 101 for the average person who is suffering in a situation they don't understand. It lays everything out in clear, plain language. It gives wonderful examples. The name of the book, again, is The Empathy Trap. Understanding Antisocial Personalities, and
you can get that on Amazon, right?
Yeah, you can get it on Amazon, I'm pretty sure, and you can. It talks about. It just covers the whole spectrum of things, and it talks about dealing with family situations. What do you do if you have children? How to identify it, how to get yourself out of it, how to recover at the end, dealing with the stigma, because that's a big thing. A lot of people who've been in a sociopathic relationship, they're kind of like shell shocked. They've got PTSD, and they want to talk about it. I mean, and people don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear them talk about it. They blame them. They shame them. That's a big part, is the blaming and shaming. And so this little book really gives some good pointers. I don't think anybody would regret buying and reading it, because it is it's excellent.
It's one of the best.
Oh, thank you very much for that.
I think our first caller, Susan from California, she sounded kind of shell shocked. Like it was so raw for her. That she was saying, "Well, yeah, okay, get the book and read the book, but how do I fix it now?" Because she's still in that stage, right? I think if you're still listening, Susan, I think something that would be a top of my list would be to find a good psychotherapist or counselor who is aware of the scale and the depth of this issue.
Yeah, and she said her son was in therapy, and I don't know if she is as well, but if the therapist isn't working, look for someone else. And also, we would probably recommend anybody that Martha Stout recommends, because she has a list, I think, in the back of her book, The Sociopath Next Door.
Yeah.
So that's a pointer, for maybe a better therapist, or a list of better therapists that are more.
And Sandra Brown as well.
And Sandra Brown's books as well.
Tim, have you read Sandra Brown's Women Who Love Psychopaths?
I'm not aware of that, but we are looking at similar types of issues as well, because we actually are looking at writing up something else at the moment around with families as well, and looking at women. So that's something that I'll take away and I'll look into that. Yeah.
Yeah, we had her on 2-3 weeks ago, and we had a pretty good discussion, because she did an actual study and found that there were many traits in common amongst the people who got taken into a sociopathic relationship, that they scored very high on this and very low on that, and that these traits actually exactly matched, or in a complementary way, the traits of the sociopath or the psychopath, which is a fascinating thing, because it's almost as though the sociopath targets the most empathic.
Yeah. That's what our seat, sort of the triad, is, because often they will target those because they are challenged, or they see them as a challenge, and it can be a game, that they actually can. And often when we go, people are empathetic, we've, come across people who actually, because of that, actually not seem to attract sociopaths, but actually it's probably because they actually are challenging. We think maybe when the sociopaths talk initially might be lying or manipulative, that they actually are, the empath challenges them. And as I said, that's what this book's trying to actually look at. And often then the sociopath can come back to the empath, and they're not happy, and then the apath, the rest of us, can be brought into that, and and the sort of empath often is the targeted one. So, there's similarities what you described there and what we're doing, and it's actually how can we, and I suppose that's what we're trying to do, is how can we help people identify they are being exposed to a sociopath, that they actually are being lied to, and they're actually dealing with something like that. Try to spot them and then do something about it.
Well, if you don't know Sandra, we can arrange an introduction, and you guys can chat across the Atlantic there. And
absolutely, that'd be wonderful. Yeah.
On the topic of victim selection, I've always sort of looked at it. Evil seems to always want to, they always have, these stories of like the evil satanic priest, always wants to sacrifice the virgin type of thing. And I think that they actually even intentionally seek out empathic people, because it's almost more fun for them, I think, to crush somebody like that than it is to do like an apath. I mean, it's not really about the easy thing. It's the game. They want to game you. They want to win. They want they want the
excitement for
the
them.
Excitement of corrupting and harming someone who can be harmed. Whereas the apath is just sort of like the shell shock, and however you poke them, they just
Absolutely. I mean, we talk about the sociopath. I mean, there's lots of things. There's the superficial charm, but there's the need for stimulation. Yeah, it can be a game because they don't have any conscious. It's just a game for them. They can lie, they can manipulate, and often they are then doing that with a person who does have empathy, who does care, who does actually worry about these things. And it is, some people describe it as a sociopathic dance. Absolutely, we need to help people, and that's really that's what I mean. Because when I come from a sort of healthcare background, and it's really our passion is just trying to help people to actually manage those situations.
Do you teach classes?
No, because this book's it's just come out in the last 2 weeks. But we are looking at providing some training to professionals and how to deal with this. In the UK, it's not really, there's very little actually been done on this. So we are looking at providing training, and that's what we're looking at over the next couple of months, is how we can manage that. And I'd be interested to know from yourself and anyone else if there is anyone else doing similar type of training.
Sandra is doing that. She has programs that go in and teach policemen how to recognize the signs of this kind of abuse. She teaches social workers, legal professionals, judges, lawyers, even goes into hospitals and teaches the hospital personnel how to counsel, how to recognize these sort of things. She's got some pretty good programs.
No, that'd be good, and that's what we're looking at. I mean, that's one of the points of the books as well, is hopefully to get, we're trying to get it as widely as possible to all of those sort of health, social care, but also, in prisons as well, in terms of actual people, so they can understand those types of behaviours, because obviously the prison population has a kind of higher than the sort of the normal expected levels of sociopaths, so we need to get those in prisons as well as out in the community to do that. So absolutely, I mean, and again, that goes back to what I was saying, we need to make sure society as a whole is actually having that conversations and actually talking about empathy and talking about and the impact as well it has. I was just, when you were talking earlier about, and a lot of these people with the shame, anxiety, the kind of fear of others that can, when you've started looking into this, you can actually start to see this in lots of other people's, and you've got to be careful, it's sort of, you don't think all society is like that, it's just trying to help people actually identify it, and,
Well, something you've pointed out in the book is the way this is almost formulaic, how the sociopath, apath, empath triad actually sort of how it works as a kind of a dynamic, So first of all, the sociopath does or says something evil. The empath challenges the sociopath, and then it's back to the sociopath who throws others off the scent and shifts the blame to the empath, and only then the apath plays his role by corroborating the sociopath's perspective. Now, what struck me was that there's a kind of a formula to it, and you've said that it's nearly every time that you see it, it gives this. If it
this
follows
is the way
all
it plays.
Through, it plays out the same. It's almost like the pathology is so predictable, and that I think is.
It's quite shocking.
Well, it's a valuable insight as well.
It's valuable, and that's a great learning tool.
A learning tool,
for people to become aware of it.
It's interesting that we go into this because I had a question kind of on this thing. Tim, have you ever read any of Cialdini's work? He's a social psychologist from Arizona.
No, again, that's another one. If you can give me the details, I can look in. We can look at that as well. Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing is I read salesman literature, how do salesmen manipulate people? And he's a social psychologist who studies how high-pressure salesmen manipulate people into buying goods and stuff. Yeah. And he breaks everything down to a lot of mechanical things that work on people consistently. And, of course, he's not talking about psychopaths and sociopaths, but if you just sort of take his stuff out and then you apply it, you can see there's a lot of mechanisms as he talks about, like the authority and social proof, which is kind of what you're talking about with the apaths. The sociopath collects apaths with them to corroborate them so that they can basically social proof somebody, gaslight them by getting corroborators from...
Yeah, they have their own traveling, clappers, so to say.
Yeah, and their superficial charm.
Yeah.
Cialdini talks about it as the likeness game. I'm like you, or you like me, and I make myself likable. That superficial charm game is an entry, and about how people start committing to things. They want to become consistent with themselves, and they don't want to waffle. So once they've become the sociopath's friend or agreed to do something, they're less likely to back out, and the sociopath can kind of press them and things like this. So it's kind of like an interesting little book from that perspective.
Yeah,
you might get some. You might get some insights for your next book.
No, absolutely. And it just triggered me there because when you've mentioned gaslighting several times, and that's exactly.
Yes.
I mean, you'll be familiar with
what is that?
With this, and it's the idea of that kind of when, and we can see that similar pattern. You're talking about sales, but also in terms of friendship groups where there might be that's three phases of idealization. Where they're very attentive and charming, and then they sort of move into the sort of devaluing phase, and they can be, and then they sort of discard people. And you can see perhaps that's that kind of technique similar to the whole kind of gaslighting effect as well, and people actually using that, becoming very charming, trying to get people on board, and then actually just going through those other phases, just to get what they want out of that relationship.
And Lobachevsky, kind of reversive blockade, that he talks about, is also kind of in the gaslighting area of things.
That's that authority and assurance.
Yeah, but the whole refusing that the truth is the truth and insisting that a lie is the truth.
Yeah.
That reversive blockade of Lobachevsky.
Tim, there's a description of gaslighting in your book, and you talk about the gaslighter and the gaslightee. Can you explain to our listeners what gaslighting is?
It's from, as I said, it's just those three stages. So obviously from that film, it's trying to actually doubt, what we're trying to describe it simply, sort of doubting someone's own sanity. It's actually trying to sort of, in that sense, not brainwashing, that might sound a bit harsh, but it's actually trying to actually get people to believe. Now, obviously in the film it came from, it's around the sort of the husband trying to actually make the wife seem as if she's going mad in one sense, in terms of actually... and it's, we describe, what we try to do is, we describe in the book as a sort of a systematic attempt by one person to erode another's reality. And we do give some examples of modern day scenarios where we actually, and as I said, it's trying to actually, as I said, to sort of erode someone else's, what they're thinking, trying to change, trying to make them think they're actually going crazy and that there's strange things happening to people. And it's a kind of, sorry.
If I could jump in for a second, I think the movie was instructive. If I remember correctly, what the husband did is there was a gas light, and he kept reducing the gas and dimming the lights and then denying to his wife that it was happening. And she kept saying, it's getting dark, it's getting dark. And he kept saying, no, it's perfectly fine. But the whole time he's turning down the gas and the light to make it dimmer, and he's walking around acting like everything's fine, and she thinks that she's losing her mind.
Yeah, he was trying to convince her that she was crazy, and she kept reporting there was strange things happening in the house, like there was dimming of these gas lights. But what happened was, it was the husband was in the attic doing some sort of dodgy activity, so he was actually, and that was affecting it as well, So, but again, it's quite a common thing that's quite well... and often when you describe it to people actually say, well, no, that's happened to me. And I think if we can try and get people to look at these case studies we've put there and actually think, well, that sounds familiar, then that might hopefully then trigger them to say, well, that's happened to me. What why has that happened? So I think often it's just giving that kind of awareness to people. And as I said, that's, if we can try and get people to think about those relationships they've been in and actually thinking, has this happened to me?
Yeah, I think what we've seen that just here on the show, we've had two people call in and go, "Oh my God, that's exactly." Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about. People will understand. For all the confusion or whatever about terms, nobody's really paying attention. They are listening because they have direct experience, so they can go, "Well, that happened to me."
Yeah.
Yeah, go on.
And it can happen
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it can happen in any relationships. We're saying it with, we give some examples within parents and a child, or between siblings, or, groups of friends or work colleagues. It happens, and, it's trying to actually, for people to see that it's actually happening. It's affecting our sense of reality, and we can disbelieve what we're seeing, and we're trying to get people to see that they actually, something's been happening to them.
Yes. I was reading your book. I was looking at this a little bit on page 26 about gender differences, and this is something that does bug me because it's really true that there hasn't been much in the way of any kind of serious research on gender differences in sociopathy or psychopathy or other types of disorders. I remember reading one study where it was being proposed that women who were diagnosed as bipolar or with borderline personality were just a variation on psychopathy, that they were sociopathic conditions. But anyhow, you know, I mean, that's still all up in the air, and they're still arguing about it everywhere. But it says here, it says the harmful potential of some sociopathic women can be overlooked. And then it says, from the available literature, and this is what I find interesting, it would seem that when women direct their aggression towards others, their victims are generally those within their domestic sphere of control, a partner, a family member, a child, a friend, work colleague. And then it says, much of the harm or aggression carried out by women involves manipulation of or damage to peer relationships through aggressive competitiveness, withdrawal of friendship, ostracism, overt bullying, telling lies about the victim to promote her rejection by others, and other acts of interpersonal aggression, which is being described in contrast to what men do, because their aggression is basically to damage the victim's sense of control. Male aggressiveness is more visible, more likely to result in arrest and punishment than is the case with women. So this means that women probably are, I don't know if there are as many as sociopathic women as there are men, but this description of how they bully and dominate, in social relationships, would you say that that's kind of their main way of doing what they do?
Well, I think we're trying to show that there are differences in terms of how people are responded to, and we're trying to make sure, because when often you describe this, if you just talk to the general public about sociopaths, often people, as I said at the beginning, have this idea it's this kind of a criminal male who's in prison, who's committed these horrible crimes, and it's not the case. And a lot of the case studies we've got are trying to actually give cases of women. Now, we're not saying it's more or less. Some of the studies earlier on looking at the kind of the split, say there are more men, but what we're trying to do is trying to get people to understand that some social women are overlooked. We've tried to link with there's an academic called Caroline Logan based in Liverpool who's looking at these issues with sociopathic women, and we're sort of trying to develop that. Now, it's not a kind of and it's trying to sort of see how these people might be missed or might be overlooked because of how their behaviour might be slightly different. It's not any different in terms of the lack of empathy or how they're reacting. It's really just how they're interacting within families and society. And it's just far too easy. And I think that of this book, I think we'd be really keen that people don't overlook women, because often they can be causing harm, just perhaps in a different way to male sociopaths. So we just need to be sort of mindful of where they are out there.
I always have a problem when people sort of like start talking about sociopaths and psychopaths and they always attribute to them violence. And I think the violence is a symptom because it's more available to men. I mean, it's not really strong physical violence is not always an option that's available to a female psychopath. She won't get so much success with what they want because You can't pick somebody.
They want to win.
They want to win, and they realize that a man realizes that the strategy to winning is a physical intimidation of people, and a woman's not going to be as physically intimidating, and so she's not going to choose that outlet. But violence is kind of like is one of the choices they make, but it's not intrinsic to them.
And
but then you would still.
That's what we're trying to do in the book, is trying to challenge that. I mean, absolutely, I was saying that's a kind of stereotype. I'm not saying that's what, that's what we obviously hope in the book. We're trying to challenge that and to actually say, how can we actually identify those women as well? And particularly, even the two callers you had was around individuals and having children and exposed to relationships. You've got two women who've called, So, again, we just need to be actually making sure that we're looking at that widely, that is just trying to sort of understand what are the differences. And again, we're trying to sort of, some of the case studies, the sort of scenarios is actually to try and get people to understand it is across the whole male and female.
We've had, on other shows when we were on the topic with other guests, we've had a few men called in and told their stories, so it is becoming a little more widely accepted. But I want to ask, when you're dealing with the woman sociopath, this dynamic that Neil just described from his notes that he got from the book, this what is it again? They start with
it's the triad where. The first move is made by the sociopath.
And what do they do?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
what I want to know is this the way it works with women also, even though it's in a social setting rather than in a setting that may ultimately lead to violence?
Well, that's what I'm saying. One of the examples we give is around sort of withdrawal, with women. It might be not in terms of manipulation, but withdrawal of friendship or ostracism, overt bullying. It could be sort of ostracizing someone within the playground environment, not talking to them, talking to others about that individual. There's the kind of the playground politics, and we're trying to draw in some of those examples from other kind of social groups as well. So it's it's trying to identify that we have been exposed to a sociopath, that there's the kind of, in terms of the APATH, the sociopaths actually trying to get the sort of the rest of the group to actually go along with what they're saying. It might be, in terms of the bullying, they might have done something in a local town or something, and the sociopath then tries to get others in the community to on their side. So when they actually are using that manipulative behaviour, that the others are saying, "Oh, that must be right," and in fact, no, the empath is the one that stood up and said, "No, this is wrong." So you can, we've got examples in the book as well where hopefully, and when we've shown these examples to others, people think, "Oh, I know someone like that. I've got a friend like that, and I've seen that happen before." And it's just trying to get people to look at it differently and not imagine it's the old stereotypes of the kind of the male. When you talk about sociopaths, it's not just men. It's across all of the kind of both sexes.
There's another taboo that you challenge in the book, kind of indirectly, but I think you might be able to clarify it for us. There's a case study of 15-year-old James as a sociopath. Now, that begs the question, can children be sociopaths?
Well, what would you say?
Well, obviously, we're in that corner. We think that, it depends on how you're using sociopath.
Yeah.
There's a lot to be said for nature and the development of these various conditions, but then there's also a lot to be said for nurture, how the individual is raised. And because, people say, oh, they were abused as a child. Well, way more people are abused as children who do not turn out sociopathic than those who do.
Mm-hmm.
So
absolutely.
There's got to be something in the nature.
Yeah, and that's what I have to touch on. We've tried not to get into too much in terms of the kind of a lot of not the science, I don't mean to minimize that, but to try and actually look much more at how to respond to that. Now, as I said, there are some studies saying if children have not been exposed to the kind of, if they've had, maybe a sociopathic parent and they've not been exposed to showing empathy, then they might show that as well. Now, there's quite a few examples we've given in the book around children, but we think there are children that don't necessarily have, that have low levels of empathy, going back to the kind of spectrum. And it might be because of how they were brought up. It might be because of some kind of physiological. I mean, we've tried not to get into too much because that's not our background, but in terms of there is studies going on around kind of the sort of brain physiology and those types of things. But I mean, there are, we are trying to look at sort of callous and emotional traits within children. We've got a section in that in the book where it does start to look at antisocial behaviour, which is there, and there are cases where that is there. And I suppose using that example is just to say that the good example is how do schools respond to those types of behaviours? Because if they're not teaching about empathy in schools and then someone is actually showing that, now some of these cases are based on sort of not real life, but they're kind of a collection of various kind of stories that we've been told or observed. So they're not fantasy, they're ones that we've seen. So how do we respond to that when we have children who actually, and there are kind of it's linked with stuff around the conduct disorder, and we're looking at a lot of these kind of we cover things there as well, how to identify those children, how to move forward. And as I said, there are some sort of theories about how to take it, and there's a section in there about how you can sort of manage those.
Tim, do you deal with, when you're talking to people about this and trying to bring awareness of sociopathic behaviour, especially among children and stuff, do you broach the topic of that there, in some cases of certain children, depending on the behaviour, that it's basically a lost cause?
Well, no, I mean...
Because, let me just give you a context for that. Because what came to mind...
Sorry.
I just want to finish that, because what came to mind was the story it's a good 10 or 15 years ago now, of I think it's Jamie Bulger.
I think he mentioned it in the book here.
In the UK, yeah. And this was him and a friend. They were only 7 or 8, 6 years old, 6 or 7 years old, and they basically more or less tortured and killed a 2 or 3 year old in
Liverpool.
Yeah,
it was so horrible. I just can't.
And
I stay awake at night.
I mean, what kind of abuse could could two young boys like that have experienced in a home environment that would lead them to mirror that if it was simply learned behaviour? And surely there are other children who have equally bad childhoods who don't do what those two children did.
Well, I always remember this story. Go ahead.
No, on you go, please.
Well, no. Go ahead, Tim. It's you.
No. You're going to say a story. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, I interrupted you, so I'm the one who's in the wrong here. I was just going to point out, it reminds you...
How do you go?
Time lapse. Time lapse. No, I was going to say, it reminds me of the story of the two brothers. One of them goes to visit the other brother in jail and says, why are you in here? And he says, it's because, Dad was a drunk and he beat us all the time, and, that's why I'm in jail. And he says, but look at you, you're a successful lawyer. Why are you that way? And he's like, because Dad was a drunk and beat us all the time, and I didn't want to be like him.
Yeah.
So it's all about the person and not so much about the situation sometimes.
Well, and exactly, and I think that's why we said at the very beginning, sometimes we might not necessarily know why the adult or the child is behaving that way. We need, it's like if they are, how can we identify those things, those types of behaviours, and how can, because there's lots of academics and scientists looking at all the kind of the environmental and the kind of physiological reasons, and that's not really what we've looked at. I mean, that's not our area of expertise. There's others who are more experienced in looking at why something. What we're trying to understand is trying to get some kind of framework, and if we have got those children who have got those behaviours, what can we actually do? What can be done? And there are some suggestions and ways of doing that. You're right. There's no X equals Y, so let's deal with X, because there's lots of variances in terms of, I mean, I come from a mental health background. Now, there's huge kind of, it's impossible to say this equals that, but, you know, we've tried to touch on some of the kind of thinking, some of the kind of research behind it, but it's very much in terms of practical steps of what can we do. And as I was saying to one of the callers earlier, there are certain sort of techniques within the book where if parents have got concerns, but also how are schools challenging those behaviours, how are teachers challenging it. In the UK, where we're based, it's you know, I don't think it's been challenged at all. I think if those children aren't, sort of, those behaviours aren't being addressed, which I think they aren't, then what's been done? Is there any help being offered?
Okay. I think it's a really big problem, and I think a lot of people are going to be glad that at least you have addressed the problem in your book, because I think there are parents who deal with this, and somebody needs to put it on the table and say, this is a problem. These are some suggestions for what you can do about it, because
we've got another call here. I'm just going to go ahead and take it.
Okay.
Hi,
hello.
What's your name? Hi. Where are you calling
hello,
from?
My name is Zoya. I'm calling from Belarus.
Okay. Hi, Zoya.
Hello, Zoya.
Hi, Zoya.
Yeah. Hello. I have a question. What one can do to help a person who was in a relationship with a psychopath or the clearly psychopath traits, and she went through a serious crisis that led to an almost nervous breakdown, just to end up in a very quick succession in a relationship with another clearly pathological person, or maybe she even got back to the same one because, you know, I'm not sure this part is unclear because she's even sharing a lot. This person uses the same control games on her. Obviously, it takes two for tango, and she plays her games as well, you know, emotional and stuff like this. But it's because she's literally under his spell. I know this person, I live with her, and I see her every day, and I can clearly see that she is a changed person. And even if she says that she's aware of it, she can do nothing much about it than to react in a mechanical way. And she's a very outgoing, social, and good-looking girl, but in this case, clearly chooses to lose her self-respect over this guy. And I know him, I saw him, and he looks, you know, like he looks all shiny, smart, and honestly creepy. So the question is, can someone do something in such case when I care about this person, and it's really worrying me because I know that she will end up with another breakdown. But she's clearly under a spell, so she won't be able to listen.
So you want to know if there's something you can do to advise or
help
wake your friend up, because she's already had a nervous breakdown as a result of a relationship, and now she is in another relationship or back with the same guy and heading for another nervous breakdown. Is that it?
Yes.
I mean, have you spoken to your friend? Have you been able to speak to your friend about this?
Well, I actually study in a university and I live in dormitories, and it's my roommate. And she, when she was done with her boyfriend, with the previous one, she changed completely. Her behavior, everything. She was not only crying every day, but she was basically, she had a nervous breakdown. She was shaking. She was all with bruises, as if he was, hitting her. But I think maybe there is something else involved. I don't know. But she was completely different person from what I became to know her, during those 2 years that we are together. And right now she's being, and she behaved past like she was addicted. It was like a love rush, like a love bug. She was all on hormones or something.
I mean, the first thing I think is to try and help them identify that there's some abuse taking place. So that's why I'm suggesting this, trying to find ways, because obviously they might be feeling very confused or bewildered or feeling anxious or shameful about the situation or fearful of this person. So we need to try and find techniques to actually try and help them to identify and recognize something is happening.
And are there any specific techniques, Tim?
Well, I mean, there's things in here in terms of if you have concerns. I'm not trying to sell the book, there's things in here.
No, go ahead.
But that's the key thing, I think, is to try and recognise that it is happening. And I suppose with your friend is actually trying to find ways. And it could be, it's difficult to talk about detail here, but maybe just trying to reflect back. If they've actually expressed some concern or anxiety, that maybe just using sort of simple counselling techniques like reflecting back those anxieties to your friend might them to help to build and understand that what they're thinking. Similar, sort of simple counselling techniques using reflection and those types of techniques. So if they voiced any kind of thoughts around or any anxiety or anything about what's happening, reflect that back to them, trying to get them to recognise there's maybe something not right here.
Mm-hmm. Are there any books on this kind of technique?
Sorry, I missed that. Can you say
Are
that
there
again?
any books that describe this kind of technique?
Well, within this we do start. But it's simple counselling techniques. It can be sort of simple, sort of cognitive behavioural. We have got some techniques in here. But again, the thing is, how can you help your friend actually to identify that something is happening? So as I said, it could be for them to even just, or even if they're listening, just take a few notes in terms of if someone is saying something to them, and then actually reflect it back. So it might be kind of the caller. Does your friend actually express any concerns about what's happening?
Well, she does, but you see, the problem is that she has some sort of a psychological problem where she sees it as validation of herself, because she basically worried about how she will be accepted, if she will be accepted, if she is loved, and everything like this. She does everything for him, so it's a sort of compensation, because it's like she needs it for herself.
And the thing is, we need to, for any of those, we need to try and identify, for them to identify that there's not something wrong, but there is some abuse or something not right taking place, to then, so as I said, it could be trying to actually reflect back some of those concerns, because obviously they're going to be very, very fearful. There could be stuff, even going onto the internet and finding similar stories, or looking at books around this one or other books as well, trying to identify maybe a similar environment, either within this book or within a kind of magazine, where you might be able to take that to them and say, look, this sounds a bit like you, a bit the similar situation to you. So trying to look if there are other things out there that they can actually, because if they just see it as themselves and no one else, but, it might be that just looking at elsewhere to see if there are other people in a similar situation.
Or a movie.
Because I thought that as long as she's not expressing, like not sharing with me that she sees something wrong, it's like it's not my place, so to say, to interfere and point it out to her.
No, I think it's fine. To try and actually, if you're a friend, to be able to actually, being able to highlight those things and just express concern. And again, this goes back to what the whole book's about, is empathy, that you could just say to them, I'm just a bit concerned about what's happening, and given some examples of, just a couple of points that, because again, if you've actually, that could be a real opportunity in there to actually show that you've got that compassion and understanding and that you're concerned. That would then start that conversation of actually, well, maybe I'm a bit concerned about this, or, because again, looking at, if you've known her for a while, looking at what she was like before in other relationships, is there times where you could talk about what she was like in the past and what she's like now.
From what I understand from reading the subtext of this situation is essentially that until she at least starts having an inkling that something's going on, what you're talking about is doing battle with him more than trying to do anything with her, because until she sees that something's wrong and says it, for you to reflect back, as Tim's saying, until she starts to say, wait a minute, I'm in trouble, I need to find something, until she's looking for that, you're not going to make much headway because you're going to be doing battle directly with him. If that's something you want to get into, fine. But I mean, I'm not sure I would really recommend that.
But stories, books, movies,
exposing her
to similar situations,
indirectly to things that would make her think.
But she lost friendships because of him, and because others see this as well.
But the thing I would say here is that, in terms of bring the compassion into this, show compassion to her. And because she might feel ashamed about the situation, she might have some insight that she might feel ashamed that she's in this situation. So it's showing that compassion, and maybe just again, it could be that he's, as we're talking earlier, she's been gaslit by the person. So we need to have. She might be doubting her own sanity again. If she's got mental health problems in the past, she might be worrying that that's happening again. So if you show some compassion and empathy, and as I said, looking at what she was like previously, or in different conversations, that might help to actually then start her to think through some of the situations she's in at the moment.
Well,
or find someone like yourself, the caller, who actually who is understanding and actually trying for you to share your experiences as well, maybe in a similar situation.
Well, the interesting thing is Cialdini uses this exact example when he's talking about how people get manipulated, and he uses the example of a woman who's being abused, and she leaves the man, and suddenly she starts doing really well, she gets a new job, her life's all good, and then the guy comes back, and he convinces her that he's changed, and she goes back with him, and, it's not a week later that he starts, beating her again, and this went on for a very, very long time, and he started getting interested in why it was that she was with this man, and he found that a lot of it had to do with the social pressure around the person, that once they've made the choice to go back, once they've made the choice, and once they've told their friends, oh, he's changed, or he's better now, they'll do anything to conceal the fact that they made a mistake. They won't want to go back on what they've said.
The shame factor.
The shame factor is so powerful for them that they will actually put makeup to cover bruises, wear long-sleeve blouses, as the song goes, to hide the fact and to conceal from their friends the depth of what's going on. And how to get out of that, of course, Cialdini doesn't really have anything to say on it because he says it's really a pickle that the person is in now because it's their own mind that is keeping them in the abuse. And it's until they actually come and say, I realize it was a mistake, until they can get past that social pressure, that guilt, it's really hard unless you can draw them out.
What we try to do as well is bring in stuff. I mean, there's similar things like addiction, where someone actually might recover from addiction. And we talk about trying to bring this idea about preventing lapse or relapse. And, lapses in your judgment or high-risk situations or, and finding ways, because there can be seemingly incidents that might not necessarily seem important, but might actually get you back into that behaviour. Maybe someone might drop you an email, or you might be curious. You might want to know what's that person doing now, or you might look at them on Facebook or Twitter, and that then you might drive past their house, and you could easily slip back into a similar situation. So we're trying to get, or if you're having a bad week, you might think, you might want to go back into that. So we look at high risk situations and about the habits and routines, and trying to get people aware of the triggers that might get you back to a situation you're in the past. Because the thing is, people might get through this, but we don't want them to go back to it next year or the year after or the year after. So it's trying to identify all these triggers that might be potentially getting you back to those behaviors.
I just want to tell the listeners that there is a chapter in the book, The Empathy Trap, called Coping in the Aftermath of a Destructive Relationship. And it has several chapter headings: witnessing sociopathic abuse, dealing with the draining effects of trauma, shame, coping emotionally, talks about the stages of grieving, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, dealing with anxiety, stress, and anger in the early days, pressing the pause button. It gives some tips for tackling stress. It has a whole list of things you can do to tackle your stress, relaxation exercises, dealing with frustration, venting. Venting means releasing pent-up feelings of anger or getting things off your chest. Then it talks about how to reduce venting gradually, and then how rumination is not necessarily good for you because it involves dwelling on or thinking deeply about the thing.
Yeah.
Basically, this book is really something you got to get.
Yeah, this book got so many. Know yourself, and then there's lists, there's checklists, mindfulness, how to control your ruminating time, what to do when the stress and anxiety aren't shifting for you, dealing with the traumatic memories. These are just priceless bits of information. How to establish boundaries, regain control of your life. Here's a good one for the caller. Is it ever advisable to tell someone they are sociopathic? I would say rephrase it. Is it ever advisable to tell someone that they are in a sociopathic relationship? There's diagrams, the recovery process, and then this is the beauty. Coping day to day, establishing personal boundaries, limiting contact, no contact, preventing lapses in judgment. This is a big one. This is a very big one.
So yeah, this book is just essential reading. It's The Empathy Trap. You can get it on Amazon by Dr. Jane McGregor and Tim McGregor. It's like a little handbook for people who need some practical input. The ABCs of dealing with this situation. Something that's been really lacking actually in the literature because of course there's all kinds of interesting theoretical stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of different books that describe a lot of it, but this is basically it's not focused on these extensive analyses of psychopaths, sociopaths, narcissists, borderlines, blah, blah, blah. It's about, people who get into these relationships, what happens to them, how to get out, and how the heck to cope with it. So it's, I was actually very pleased with this book because it's something that's really been needed. And this one is one I don't have any hesitation recommending highly to all our listeners. And
thank you. That's very kind of you also.
Well, it's a really nice book, and
you got to understand we have shelves full of books on this topic.
We have an entire library. We have
over 10,000 books I think at this point.
Yeah, at least.
This is one of those books that was just it's so easy to read and so fun.
I don't know if it's fun so much, but it's easy to read.
After reading like all of these other books on and narcissism, and the worst ones are the scientists who want to spend 30 pages nitpicking some particular detail, and you just want to get to some.
I think it's fun to learn about it in the sense that this is a topic that is really harmful, has harmful effects on people, but it's also fascinating. I mean, if it's really true, that 1 in 25% or something. Oh no, sorry.
He's saying 1 in
100. Even if you say 1 in 100, it means 1 in 100, which is this conservative. I mean, it still means 3 million people in the States and about 70 million worldwide. It's just one of those things you think, why is it not being tackled?
Exactly.
And it causes so much damage to society.
Absolutely.
Well, I think one of the best things about the book and what you're saying here is that it's actually liberating. It might not be fun, but it's very liberating. And the examples you're giving are really something that people can relate to. And a lot of the times people lose interest in the topic because they think, well, this is about politicians or serial killers or whatever. People. And when you get to examples, whether you're dealing with a sociopath or not, when you get to examples of concrete manipulation, something that really affects you in your life, and it seems that from the approach you take in counseling, you're doing just that, taking people through the various steps where they can recognize what's really, really going on in their lives, which therefore hopefully will take them to a point where not only they can get out of difficult situations and heal, but also start seeing the bigger picture and how these sociopaths, these people without empathy affect the entire society, because they can more easily extrapolate what happens in their home to what's happening in society than doing the reverse process of seeing something that seems far away.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So
and
that's something that really is really good in what you're saying, and you know, this type of literature is not just the abstract concepts or
the stories are good.
Oh, that's good, because it was a bit of an unknown, because when you're trying to describe those situations, you know, and trying to understand, because it's obviously in different countries and different cultures, but the stories we've tried to put in are just ones that, as I said, are generally true stories that we've come across, and just trying to get people to think. But the thing that we found most helpful for us as well is people say, "Oh, I can recognise that. I can see myself. I can see my friend in that situation." Yeah. And it then means that, well, at least they've identified that there's something not right, and it then means them to start thinking. And if they can support friends or family, I mean, as we've done it, you know, to try and help, you know, that's been the main driver for us, is trying to help people. That there's some things here that have helped us, and and even if a couple of callers you've had tonight, if they can just move forward in some way, that'll be, the book itself will have done if it helps one person, what I'm trying to say is I think we'd be happy. You know.
All right, Tim, I think we're going to end it there. I think we've covered most of what we wanted to cover. I just want to thank you for being on the show, and thank you for writing the book along with Jane. And
thank you for having the chance.
No problem. The name of the book is The Empathy Trap: Understanding Antisocial Personalities. And that's about it. So thanks to our listeners, thanks to our callers. Hope you enjoyed the show. We will be back next week.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Thanks, Tim. Have a good evening.
Okay. Thank you very much, then. Take care. Cheers.